Either my camera placement is really weird or this background is kind of weird. But half my face was in shadow when I sat in the other one. It's probably better now. The window is pointed right where I like to sit. Yeah, no, the lighting here is still aggressive. Look at this Hallmark movie-ass lighting. Where's this when I need it on the other side of the room? Where's this when I need it in my shooting corner? No, of course not. Of course not. Can I cut out? Can I just cut out this backdrop? I mean, this is okay, but it's not like I'm gonna shoot the intro again, so you get what you get, I guess. Hey, you ever just make a wall hanging in white and think to yourself, this is really glorious, but I wanna make another one, but in red this time, and I wanna make it for my mom for Christmas because I love her and she's the best and she's just done so many things for me, including teaching me how to knit. Me too, super relatable, let's make that. I'm also making this for whoever might be watching it on YouTube. When I made this one, I thought this is really glorious when I look at it in person, but I realized that you can't see it at all. It doesn't pop on camera. But the new one I haven't already made because I'm obviously not filming the intro after making the video because that would be so weird. It really pops on camera. If I had already made it, it would. If you're new to my channel, I am Viola Rose. I make stuff and sometimes I wear stuff. Often I wear stuff that I make. Not this time it's going on the wall, but I'm bad at introducing myself. All right, guys, let's make this thing. If you're going to be a knitter, at some point you're going to knit a sampler. There are a lot of reasons for knitting one: to swatch a project, try out a new stitch, or because you want something really cool to hang on your wall. When you have no more wall space, they also make really great gifts, so let's make one. I don't know about you, but I love anything that starts with only 2 stitches and then forces me to work my way up to more. All right, Scouts, this is your time to shine. Tie a slip knot, then tie a half hitch overhand bird glove. I'm just kidding, that's not a real knot. Also, the Spanish bowline knot looks like a uterus, and you should never teach it to children currently taking sex education if you expect them to maintain their composure. Moving on! Take out your double-pointed needles and use them for the only thing you're ever going to use them for if you expect to maintain your sanity. Some people knit hats and socks with them. Those people are insane. You're only going to need 2 because you're going to knit something called I-cord. It has been speculated by Debbie Stoller in her famous knitting book, and within the knitting community, that I-cord stands for idiot cord, because it is the magical substance that is made when you do not know how to use a double-pointed needle. It also makes like a really thick string, so it's got that going for it. You want to make straps for one of those drawstring bags? I-cord. You want to make a curtain tie back? I-cord. You want to make a bottom part of your thing that you're making for a wall hanging so that you can hang a tassel off of it? I-cord. Cast 2 stitches onto your needle. Okay, here comes the seemingly stupid part. You're going to turn your needle around, push those stitches to the other end of your needle, and then just knit it normally. This seems crazy, but I guarantee you that if you do it enough times, it will actually make a thick string and not completely ruin your knitting. Push it back to the other end again, and do that again and again and again and again until your string is as long as you want it to be. Honestly, it's kind of cool to be able to teach so many different skills in the same video because we're making a whole sampler. So it's like you're going to learn how to increase for the bottom, you're going to learn how to make a bobble stitch, you're going to learn how to make like an open weave fabric for the top. This is a pretty great video to watch if you're learning how to knit. I mean, if I were better at explaining things, it would be. On the bright side, this knits up really fast. Look how long it got just while I was talking. On another bright side, I-cord is knit on so few stitches that children will never get bored. So if you need a long cord for a knitting project, I highly suggest just letting a kid sit beside you and knit along with you and do this for you. But not a dog. Dogs are bad for knitting. Sorry, Ella. We'll go out later. Let's skip ahead to this part being done. Whoosh! If you're not done with double-pointed needles yet, try knitting some cable socks and then get back to me. The rest of us are going to put these 2 stitches on a pair of single-pointed needles and then increase by knitting 2 stitches into the same stitch twice. How's your attention span so far? Mine too. That's why I love a knitting pattern that I can just sit there and work on without having to think about it too much. I do not love the process of knitting, but I do love the result. It's something that is very hard to portray visually because you can't skip steps and there are so many steps. Basically, we're going to carry this increase along both sides of the leading edge on every knit row until we're finished the little triangle at the bottom of the piece. Every other row is a knit row, and on every single one of those knit rows, we're going to knit 1, make 1, and then knit to the end of the row, and then knit make one and then knit one. So let's just speed run that. In my original piece, I started the baubles here, but I decided to use seed stitch on the bottom of the one for my mom. I think it'll look a little bit classier and more to her personality and also be easier to mail. Now that I have enough fabric that you can actually see what I'm doing, I'm going to show you this in real time. This is the increase row, the knit row that I talked about. So for me right now, it's every other row. So I'm going to knit one stitch and then I'm going to make one in the next stitch. Because the current pattern that I'm using is seed stitch, I'm going to knit and then purl across the row. So for seed stitch, you go knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl on one row, and then purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit on the next row. So basically on the row after, you make one row that's knit purl like it's 1-to-1 rib, and then the following row you knit the purl stitches and purl the knit stitches, and it creates this nubby little fabric that's at the bottom of my piece. It's a very heavy, very thick fabric that people tend to use in jackets, pieces for children, just to create texture in another piece. In this case, I'm using it in the bottom of my knit piece just to add a little bit of weight so that it hangs properly on the wall. With my other one, I used a bobble stitch. I thought it would work the same way, but it ended up kind of light and rolling up on itself, and it still does. I still kind of occasionally have to reblock it. So now that we're at the other end of the row and we have 2 stitches left on the needle, I think, we're going to make one in the second to last stitch, and then we're going to knit the last stitch. And then on my following row, if I was knitting this flat, I would just be knitting 2 on the edge and then purling across. So I'm also trying to carry these 2 edge stitches up the side. I'm trying to make sure that I always knit the first 2 stitches, and that's just so that I have kind of a ribbon up both sides that adds structure to the piece. If you don't do that and you just sort of knit across your wall hanging and you don't have an edge, it doesn't look like a wall hanging, it just looks like a scarf that you hung on the wall. But some people do like that style, so I'm not here to judge them. I'm just telling you what I think looks good. I did those increases every other row until it was about the width of the palm of my hand, and then I started going straight. I went straight for a couple of inches in the same stitch just to create this little banner bottom. Do you feel like you're watching this upside down at this point? Here, I'll turn it around for you. After I was finished little banner bottom with the seed stitch, I did a couple of rows of knit stitch to create that straight stitch there, and then I did a few 4 or 5 rows of stockinette, and then I did another row of like a couple of rows of knit stitch, and then I went back into stockinette. The great thing about knitting a sampler is that there's no rules. You don't have to start or end at a certain point. It's not like knitting for the body where everything has to fall in a certain place. So this is the first row where I'm making a bobble. So what you do is you knit up to where you want the bobble to be, and you're going to make 4 in the same stitch. However you do that is up to you. I usually just knit 1 in the front, 1 in the back, 1 in the front, 1 in the back of the same stitch. And then when you are finished doing that, you're going to go back and you're going to purl over those same stitches. So if you knit them, you're going to purl over them. If you purled them originally, you're going to knit over them. So you're going back over the same stitches. The biggest mistake that people make when they're making a bobble stitch is to keep knitting and think that you can kind of make 4 in the same stitch, knit all the way across the row, and then come back. You can't. You have to come back across the row at the same time as where you started it. I'm making so much sense right now. The point is, go back and forth, knitting and purling over the same 4 stitches that you created out of 1 stitch, and basically what you're going to make is this big corn chip. And once you fluff out the corn chip, it makes a big fluffy ball, which we know as a bobble. The short form for this in a knitting pattern would be MB, or make bubble, and there are definitely knitters that explain this a lot better than I do. I had something like 42 or 48 or whatever stitches on the needle, so I just decided to put 3 stitches in between every bobble. It's standard for me to put an uneven number of stitches in between my bobbles because it allows me to then put the next bobble in between the last 2 bobbles. So you have to have an uneven number of stitches on your needle so that you can put something on a middle stitch. I have a habit of knitting really close to my body, so it was very difficult for me to continuously keep this on camera, and I hope I did a half decent job of that for you. Once you have gone back and forth, I do it about 4 times, you're going to put your needle through all of the stitches, and then you're going to knit through it. So you're going to knit all of your stitches back together at the end. So you can probably guess how this works. Because you put 4 stitches into the first 1 stitch and then you knit back and forth on them and then you bound them off at the end, you're going to end up with this little nub right here that I have, and then you're just going to knit through that last stitch and then you're going to keep going. So there's my bauble, ain't she cute? And then you're going to keep going. So in this case I knit something like 3 in between. You can squeeze your bauble if you want to or fix it. I made the mistake, like on my other one, I put a lot of baubles at the bottom and I felt like that was a mistake, so I didn't want to do that here. When I'm knitting a gift, I try to think about the person I'm going to give it to and their lifestyle and what they would want to see on their wall or, you know, wherever they're going to put it. So I think about what my mom would want to look at. My mom isn't one of those people who has a busy decor. She's not one of those moms who had a big gallery wall with pictures of her kids. She just had 1 or 2 tasteful pictures of us on the wall. So I knew that she'd want something more elegant and a lot less busy, that the eye wouldn't have to follow as much. I also found that because I was making this in red, it popped out from the wall so much already that it didn't need the amount of texture that the white one has, because it really speaks for itself with the color. I also chose the color based on what I thought my mom would want. When I decorate for Christmas, it's all blues and grays and white. But my mom's favorite Christmas colors are gold and red and green. And that's the joy of making gifts. It's not about you. It's not about what you want. It's not about how you feel. You don't give gifts thinking, are they going to have enough gratitude for me? Are they going to like it? Are they going to validate me? You give gifts thinking about the person that you love and what they love and what they care about. Gifting isn't a test of how well you know someone or how much you care. The fact that someone thought about you enough that they wanted to give you something in the first place speaks volumes about how much you matter to that person. That's why I do a lot of handmade stuff at Christmas. It's not my story, but my aunt told me a story once, and she has a good deal of money now, but when she was younger and she was in university and just trying to work her way through life, she didn't. And she really wanted to give my mother a gift for Christmas. She loved her sister and she wanted to give her a champagne gift, but she had dollar store money, you know what I mean? So she goes to the dollar store and she gets these butterflies. My mom was an anthropology student at the time. She takes these pretend butterflies and she mounts them up on slides and then frames them and gives a little frame to my mom as a gift with the butterflies in it. Labeled, you know, like a little specimen thingy. My aunt has given my mom a lot of gifts over the years and she's much more well off now, so a lot of them have been more expensive. But that little butterfly specimen thingy that she made for my mom back in college still has pride of place on my mom's wall. I don't think she's ever loved anything that her sister gave her more. Because when it comes to gifts and giving, my mom appreciates the effort that you put into it and the care more than whatever amount of money you might have spent. I think this is why I appreciated a macaroni necklace from my own 2-year-old more than I appreciated a diamond ring when I got one as a gift. If you make a mistake when you're making these baubles, it's no problem. You can pull the entire bauble out and just go back to the original 1 stitch that you had. The mistake that I made here was that I accidentally purled on the knit side. So instead of having a nice knit stitch bauble, I ended up with one that was kind of half purl and half knit, so I had to redo it. Ella, I am so glad I bought you the squeaky toys for when I'm doing these voiceovers. To me, it feels more special to make things for the people I love, and maybe it feels that way for you too, and that's why you're here. Baubles sometimes like to go backwards. Sometimes they'll push through to the back of your fabric and you're going to be like, oh my God, I didn't make a bauble. What have I made? Don't even worry about it. They pop right out the other side. That's actually what's really fun about these wall hangings as well, is that you can just kind of walk up to them and pop your baubles back and forth. I'm going to finish this row and then we're going to come back. Now that we've finished the entire row of baubles, we're on the back of the fabric. All I'm going to do is knit those 2 stitches along the side and then I'm going to purl across the back of the fabric. So this is what my bauble row looks like. I'm happy with it. It is good. It's actually pretty good compared to the white fabric. I will say that this particular yarn, which is Red Heart Super Saver in Sparkle something. Red Heart doesn't really name their colors, so this is just Red Heart Super Saver Sparkle yarn in red or whatever. It knits up a little bit thin on the baubles, so it creates kind of a little I don't know, a nub, a corn chip shape. It's the reason why, one of the other reasons why I didn't make the bottom of this the way I made the other one, because it started looking more like tendrils or tentacles. And I don't know if that's because of the color or the texture, because the white one is knit out of the Red Heart yarn as well. Another thing that's really great about knitting these sampler wall hangings is that they look great. Like, they look fantastic no matter what kind of yarn you use, making them a fantastic project for new knitters who may not want to spend a ton of money on fancy yarn. I know when I was a new knitter making a ton of mistakes and I didn't have very much money for yarn, I would have been completely dragged if I had ruined an expensive ball of yarn by messing up a project. So yeah, as you can see here, we're just knitting the 2 edge stitches and then we're purling all the way across behind these bobbles and just kind of setting the row in before we do anything else. After this, I'm probably going to do a couple of more rows of stockinette stitch, and then I might do another row of bobbles, or I might just leave this as one row depending on what I decide to do. So here we are at the end of the row, and we're just gonna, again, we're gonna knit that last 2 stitches if I do it properly and don't mess it up, watching myself mess it up. Ah, yay, I put it on the other side, okay. And I'm gonna knit those last 2 stitches. I thought I did it right this time, for once. Don't worry too much if you forget to knit that last 2 stitches on any of the rows. As long as you don't do it too many times, nobody's gonna notice. You can pinch your bobbles out just to see how they look at this point and just to make sure that they're the right distance apart. Mine are supposed to be 3 stitches apart. At one point I put 4, and that meant at the end I had to do 2. It doesn't really matter. It's not that big a deal. Honestly, these samplers are very forgiving. Again, that's what I love about knitting them. I can mess up and nobody's gonna notice unless I point it out like I just did to you. So again, we start the next row by knitting the first 2 stitches, and then in this case, I'm just gonna go across, like I said, and do a couple of rows of stockinette. After that, I just decided to go for it and make another row of bobbles. So what I'm doing is I am knitting into the center stitch between 2 bobbles, and then I am making a bobble on the center stitch, if that makes any sense. So each one of these bobbles had 3 stitches in between it. So I'm knitting one, and then I'm making a bobble on the center one, and then knitting back. Again, super important. Don't add all of your stitches on one row and then go back across the next row. It won't work. You've got to make each bobble individually. So you have to cast those stitches on, turn your work, knit back across them, turn your work again, knit back the other way 3 or 4 times until you end up with a big boofy boof on it. And then you knit all of the stitches together at the top to create your bobble. So yeah, I ended up with 2 rows of bobble here at the bottom of the work, which again is going to add some weight to the bottom of the work and hopefully make it keep hanging on my mom's wall for years to come beautifully as a glorious, lovely Christmas decoration. Isn't it funny how you could be like 42 years old and you're like, Mommy, I made this, hang it up on your wall. I'm going to admit that in between filming, I got a little overzealous. I was sitting in front of the TV and I just kept knitting along. So I did the seed stitch, I did the rows of stockinette stitch, I did the bobbles, which you're going to see me fix when I'm blocking them, but I did try and like poke them out a little bit. You can also see how if you did too many rows of these in red, it would look like a creepy creature instead of a pretty wall hanging, not what I wanted. Your fabric is definitely going to fold in on itself on the sides a bit, and it is going to be much thinner from one side of the other than it is going to look after blocking. I didn't give you a specific number of stitches to cast on in the Red Heart with the size 7 needles. I cast on about 42 to 48 stitches to get something that is about, I don't know, 1.5 feet, 2 feet wide. But choose the width based on the gauge that you're knitting in and the size of the wall hanging that you want to make. At this point, I decided I wanted to put some little holes in here just to break up all the stockinette. So here's how we're going to put those in. First, we're going to pick up our needles and we're going to put our 2 knit stitches here at the edge. Then we're going to come across by a couple of stitches, however many you want before you make the little hole. maybe 2 or 3 in my case. After that, we're just going to go ahead and do a yarn over. So yarn over is where you just take your yarn and put it over the needle without knitting it, and then we're going to knit the next 2 stitches together. So again, I'm going to just come over by a few stitches. I'm going to do a yarn over, which is just putting the yarn over the needle, and then I'm going to knit 2 stitches together. So all across this row, we're just going to keep doing yarn overs and then knitting 2 together, yarn over, knitting a couple of stitches and then doing our yarn over and then knit 2 together. And then when you come back across the row, you're just going to, once again, start off with those 2 knit stitches at the beginning of the row, purl across the rest of the row to the last 2 stitches, and then when you get to the last 2 stitches, you're going to knit those as well to keep making that ribbon. Remember to always purl your yarn over stitches as well. I used to do this thing, and it's kind of weird, but a lot of new knitters do it, where you have an instinct when you see the yarn over to drop it off the needle. And I kind of know what it is, because sometimes when you're knitting, you accidentally pick up a stitch in the middle of 2 stitches. So you have to drop that off the needle if you're knitting to work properly. But in this case, don't drop it off, knit it. And then you're going to turn your work over again, and you're going to see these little cute holes. You might have to stick your finger through them to make them more visible. I like to leave them subtle sometimes, or I will, stick my finger in them and make a big hole out of it. I think that did a lot actually for the wall hanging to kind of break up the boring flatness of that one very large stockinette panel that I did. There's no science to this. Whenever I think that my piece is getting too flat or too boring, I just go in and, I knit more bobbles. Full disclosure, bobble stitch is the stitch I'm practicing right now because I'm going to be doing a cushion cover for one of my relatives for Christmas, and I wanted to see if I could consistently produce this stitch in a way that would look good on a cushion. I'm trying to talk, but my cat is simultaneously trying to lay on my face, so I'm like... Is he a good microphone muffle, or are you hearing nothing but purring right now? You could stop at this point and you'd already have a really nice wall hanging. I do want this one to be a little bit longer, not as long as the one that's hanging on my wall, but just a little bit longer so it looks more like a wall hanging and less like, a small piece of artwork. I'm going to go ahead and knit a couple more panels. This is the point we're at now, so I just did a row of bobbles, and then I just sort of carried on doing whatever stitch I felt like, whatever stitch felt right, whatever stitch I wanted to meditate on. So now we're at the top, and we need to create that light, airy fabric up here at the top in order to be able to put the nice stick that we're going to find in the woods through it. We're going to use those same yarn overs, but we're going to make the holes a lot bigger this time. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit my 2 edge stitches, and then I'm going to wrap the yarn a lot of times. So the more times you wrap the yarn when you do a yarn over, that's as long as that stitch is going to become. So in this case, I'm going to wrap the yarn about 8 or 9 or even 10 times, depending how big I want these airy holes to be. I caution you, wrap this very loosely. The tighter you wrap it, the harder it's going to be to move the stitches on your needle when you come back to this later. So all I'm doing is I am knitting 1 stitch, I'm wrapping 8 times, knitting 1 stitch, there you go, 1 knit stitch, and then I'm going to wrap again. I'm going to yarn over 8 times, wrap it 8 times around the needle, and what that's going to do is create this intensely light, extremely airy fabric. This is really good if you're knitting things like produce bags, market bags, umbrella holders that I'm about to knit for people, because you know how you always lose that cover for an umbrella? So I make these umbrella hangers that I can hang them on the wall, and not only do they look pretty, but nobody ever loses them because they're so pretty. So yeah, just keep doing this all along the row, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like. All we're going to do at this point is knit the next 4 or 5 rows straight across the row. Easy peasy, unless you've got a dog. No, I'm trying to make a video. I gotta make a knitting video right now. I finished my knitting video. I'm almost done. Then we snuggle. I promise. I promise we snuggle when I finish my knitting video. Can I finish my knitting video? Is it gonna be all Ella's belly? The whole video? Yes? Okay, I will tell them and then we'll be done. So once you're done once you're finished doing that, you can have some lines that you can stick a dog paw through. And then, a stick through. And then we're just gonna go across. We're gonna knit across those stitches 4 times. No, don't knit! Don't knock my knitting basket! No! We're good. All right, we're gonna pet the dog for an hour and then no. 4 knit rows.
Nice try, but no. You're doing. Daniel did.
Sorry, just trying to bind off. Moment, please. Bind off by knitting 1 stitch, knitting the next stitch, and then leapfrogging the first stitch over the second stitch that you knit, and just doing that all the way along the row until your piece of knitting slowly comes off of your needles. The dog is optional. Well, not for me. The dog just inserts herself, but for you, the dog may or may not be optional. I feel like discussing the optionality of dogs is a whole other video and a whole can of worms. How do you feel? Do you feel good? Do you like your piece? I love mine. I hope that you like yours too. It seems like we're done here. Oh, but there are still 2 more steps. Well, 3. Yeah. I love how whenever I ask a question, Mackie's just like, meow. All right, so here you have it, your full-on 70s wall hanging made of the sparkly yarn and your dog who has decided it is her new blanket, but it isn't. I'm sorry, Ella, we're sending this to Nana. Let's make a tassel for it. These are so easy. You're going to be like, oh my God, why haven't I been making tassels all my life? Good question. I feel like my entire house would be tassels if I was allowed to just consistently sit here making tassels all day long. Pretty simple. You just wrap a bunch of yarn around your hand. This is how we make the small tassel on this one. You can make a longer tassel by wrapping it around something else. You could make like an ultra extra long tassel if you wanted, just by wrapping it around your whole arm. My mom actually used to do this to make braids for dolls. You'd wrap it around your whole arm and then you would tie the tassel in multiple places and it makes like a yarn hair doll braid. I'll show you that someday if I ever decide to make a doll, but it'll probably go the way of the rest of my promises of things that I'm going to show you how to make, so don't count on it too hard. Alrighty, once you have your little ball with the hole in it, you're going to take another piece of string and wrap it around the inside of here. We're going to tie this around itself really tightly. Does your dog get itchy ears in the winter? Here's what to do about that. Either don't get a dog with big ears or expect to be paying vet bills every month all winter. Anyway, tie this really tightly so that it doesn't come loose. And then you can start wrapping another piece of yarn over the middle of it, creating a bell end. If you are one of my viewers from Britain, I apologize for saying bell end. It is not as derogatory here as it is there. Okay, and then you kind of cut the bottom out of it and make these little tassels, and then you even it up and make it pretty because it's going to look kind of janky when you just cut straight through them. Kind of like when you roll your bangs into a roll and then you cut straight across, how it looks super weird and you have to like grab the I-cord bottom of your piece and a little sewing needle made for knitting and just sew it on by the part that you originally put through. I like to pass it around a couple of times just to make it neat and then pass it through your I-cord in order to, hide it and then just cut it off. Then you got to soak the whole thing in water and detergent because you and your dog have had your grubby paws all over it, and also because you need to block this piece or it is never going to hang flat on a wall. Blocking is just a fancy word for getting your knitting super wet and then manipulating it into the position that you want it to be in and then leaving it to dry in that position so that hopefully it stays that way. If I don't block this piece, it's not going to hang flat against the wall. The edges are going to curl up and it's just going to look like a big tube. Similarly, if you don't block a sweater, it can end up looking really, really weird with ultra long arms or ultra short arms or pieces that are curled under or over. I have a table with a towel on it that I use for blocking and also for ironing that's kind of just always sitting here like this. I'm going to sit here and just kind of pull this and shove it into position and shape it until I'm happy with the shape, and then I'm going to leave it here to dry for a couple of days.
I'm just going to forget about it, and then in a few days I'm going to come back and be like, oh wow, I forgot, that was there.
These are gorgeous as wall hangings, but I've also done them as table runners by just reducing at the other end the same way that I put the stitches on at the one end so that I ended up with 2 sides that have that triangle pattern at the bottom. And when you could do that, you can also use the baubles as a way to separate different dishes on the table. As much as you want to futz around with your baubles during the whole process, the best time to fix your baubles is during blocking because they'll be wet. Again, I noticed that mine looked a little narrow, so I wanted to go ahead and just fluff them out a bit and make some fat baubles. I just leaned down and pulled each one of them out and flattened them and squished them until I ended up with the shape that I like. It was an absolute pain. It took a really long time and it was absolutely worth it. It looks a lot better than the one hanging on my wall, which I'm actually considering taking down, reblocking, drying it again so that it looks as good as this one. There are certain things I only seem to think of when I'm making something for someone else. Wow, we're almost finished making this thing. Just knit some I-cord while watching a cheesy Hallmark movie. Or just don't judge me and watch whatever you watch.
We would sneak into the kitchen and make a big dinner. And then afterwards, we would trade all the presents that we got from home that we didn't want. The bowl, everyone fighting over the same bowl of cranberry sauce.
Well, you're spending Christmas Eve with Charlotte and the family, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. And I'm sure it will be very nice. But I'm guessing there's going to be more than one bowl of cranberry sauce.
When you're finished watching the Hallmark movie, in this case, Jolly Good Christmas, and finding out that in the endless conundrum of will they, won't they definitely did, go out to your yard or out to the woods and find a wonderful stick and just pass it through the top of the open weave at the top of your work. Then take that new piece of I-cord which you have created to your own specifications depending on the length that you need. I make mine about the same width as the piece, and then I just kind of attach it at both sides, and then it should be just long enough or short enough, as it were, to hang it off the wall. Attach it to this side. It was weird, right? I honestly thought that he was going to end up with Charlotte. He and Anjali didn't seem like a great match. Then just work away your ends on this side, clip it off, move over to the other side, and do exactly the same thing. I was really glad that everyone was able to act with a certain level of maturity. That whole boss's daughter thing really scared me throughout the whole film, and I was like, what's going to happen? Wow, that's it. You're done. Pick it up, hang it on your wall. Actually, mine looks a little bit saggy. So here's a tip if yours also looks a little bit saggy. Just grab the bottom of it, throw it right through the top, and it's going to make it roll around a bit so that the strap is rolled around your stick a little more, and that'll make your piece look straighter. I had to do that with the white one as well. I did it a couple of times with this one. Honestly, I wasn't really happy with the way that I put the stick through in the first place, so I decided to put it through again. The first time I didn't feel like I took small enough chunks. The result was a bit weird looking. I didn't feel like I'd taken enough time with it. It was kind of meh. I thought I was going to leave it, but when I really looked at it, especially once it had the strap on it, it really wasn't looking nice. So I did it again. It wasn't tough to redo, and honestly, I think it ended up looking a lot better.
Watching my video. If you are new to the channel and you haven't done so already, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you can get notified when a new video comes out, because you might want to make some of the stuff I'm making.
If I weren't filming this, the only audience I would have would be my dog, who is currently sleeping on the couch. So,
if you're not new to my channel, welcome. You're awesome. Thank you for continuing to watch my videos.